In June of 2004, a small mountain town in Colorado became the stage for one of the most infamous acts of vigilante destruction in modern American history. A story that sounds almost unbelievable, but is very real. The tale of the Killdozer. To understand how one man ended up sealing himself inside a homemade armored bulldozer and leveling much of his town, we need to step back into the life of Marvin Heemeyer, a skilled welder and muffler shop owner who lived in Granby, Colorado. Heemeyer wasn't originally from Granby, but when he arrived in the early 1990s, he quickly established himself as a talented craftsman. People described him as friendly, sometimes eccentric, but very capable with machines and welding. Heemeyer purchased a 2-acre plot of land on the edge of town and set up a muffler repair shop, which seemed like a good fit for the growing community. But that land would eventually become the center of a bitter dispute that consumed his life. The conflict began when a local concrete company, Mountain Park Concrete, owned by a family called the Dochefs, sought to build a concrete plant near Heemeyer's shop. Town officials rezoned the land in favor of the plant despite Heemeyer's objections. Heemeyer believed the plant would block access to his shop, hurting his business. Over time, his frustration deepened, not only with the concrete company, but also with the town council, zoning officials, and anyone he believed was part of a conspiracy against him. He fought back through official channels, appealing zoning decisions, trying to negotiate road access, and even petitioning courts. But one by one, his efforts failed. The sense of isolation and anger grew stronger. In recorded audio tapes discovered after the events, Heemeyer described himself as being chosen by God to stand against what he saw as corruption and injustice. He felt cornered, powerless against powerful interests in a small town where everyone seemed connected. But quietly, for over a year, he was working on something that would make him anything but powerless. Inside his shop, Heemeyer began modifying a Komatsu D355A bulldozer he had bought at auction. Using his welding skills, he constructed steel and concrete armor plates to cover the cab, engine, and tracks. The armor was so thick, layers of steel with poured concrete in between, that small arms fire and even explosives would prove useless against it. He installed cameras protected by bulletproof glass so he could see outside, air compressors to blow away dust, and gun ports for weapons. The machine became a kind of improvised tank, though Heemeyer never intended to use it for war. It was his instrument of vengeance, which he would later call a God's plan. On June 4th, 2004, Marvin Heemeyer climbed inside the armored bulldozer, sealed the hatch with a homemade lid that once welded shut could not be opened from the outside, and rolled into town. What followed was 2 hours of destruction that would stun America. Heemeyer drove straight through the concrete plant that had sparked his anger, reducing it to rubble. Then he turned his sights on the town hall, the newspaper office that had criticized him, the homes of people connected to his disputes, and even the local hardware store owned by another family he believed had wronged him. Building after building crumbled under the 85-ton machine, dust and debris filling the streets as horrified residents looked on. Police responded quickly, but they were helpless. Their bullets bounced off the armored plates. SWAT teams tried explosives and even considered using anti-tank weapons, but none were available in the small mountain town. The National Guard was put on alert. Meanwhile, Heemeyer moved methodically, choosing targets linked to his long list of grievances. For nearly 2 hours, he drove through Granby, flattening or severely damaging 13 buildings, causing an estimated $7 million in damages. And yet, throughout the entire rampage, not a single other person was killed. Some people see this as intentional, that Heemeyer wanted to destroy property but not lives. Others argue it was simply luck. Eventually, the Killdozer's destruction came to an end, not because of police action, but because the machine got stuck. While tearing into a hardware store, the bulldozer's radiator and engine were critically damaged, and the vehicle lost power. With his machine disabled and surrounded, Heemeyer took his own life inside the cab with a handgun. It took authorities hours to break into the fortified bulldozer. When they finally did, they found Heemeyer dead. The town was left in shock, the streets filled with wreckage, and the story of the Killdozer quickly spread across the nation. In the aftermath, people struggled to make sense of it. Was Heemeyer a villain who lashed out violently after failing to get his way? Or was he a kind of folk hero, a lone man who stood up against local corruption with the only means he had left? Opinions remain divided to this day. Some point to his meticulous planning and the fact that he left recordings explaining his motives, as proof that this was not just a breakdown, but a calculated act of revenge. Others note that no one besides Heemeyer died, which suggests he may have drawn a moral line, seeking destruction but not bloodshed. The bulldozer itself was dismantled by authorities, cut into pieces so it could never be put back together. But in the years since, the legend of the Killdozer has only grown, inspiring documentaries, songs, internet memes, and endless debates about justice, corruption, and how far one man can go when he feels unheard. What's undeniable is that Marvin Heemeyer left behind one of the most dramatic and destructive protest acts in American history. His story is a chilling reminder of how bitterness and isolation can boil over into catastrophe, and how a man with enough skill, determination, and anger can challenge an entire town, not with words, but with steel and concrete. And in that moment, the small town of Granby was transformed into a battlefield between one man and the community he felt had betrayed him. The Killdozer story endures not because it's simple, but because it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. When does righteous anger cross the line into madness? Can someone be both a victim and a villain at the same time? And what happens when the systems meant to resolve disputes instead leave people feeling voiceless? Marvin Heemeyer answered those questions in the most destructive way possible. His bulldozer rampage lasted only a few hours, but its echoes still rumble today. A cautionary tale of vengeance, desperation, and the terrifying power of one man's will.